Raise some
Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, the time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.
Welcome to the Raising Cain Show. I'm your host, Nate Cain, and tonight we're diving into one of the most pressing issues of our time, human trafficking. This isn't something happening in distant lands or hidden corners of big cities. It's happening right here in West Virginia and our surrounding areas. But thankfully, there are people fighting back. Tonight, I'm honored to welcome April Brock to the show. April has been married to her husband, Rob, for 22 years, and they have 2 children. They reside in St. Clairsville, Ohio. April is not only a licensed optician with 30 years of experience, but she's also deeply involved in her community, serving through her church and other volunteer work. She's also the co-lead of I.G.N.I.T.E, a nonprofit group working tirelessly to serve victims of human trafficking and educate the community about the seriousness of this issue in our area. We'll discuss the incredible work of I.G.N.I.T.E and what they're doing, how they're raising awareness and helping victims, and how you can get involved in the fight against human trafficking. We'll also dive into the U.S. State Department 2024 Trafficking in Persons Report, which outlines the global and national efforts to combat this evil. And lastly, we'll discuss the recent sentencing of 2 cross-country sex traffickers who were just sentenced to 14 and 30 years in federal prison. April, welcome to the show.
Nate, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it, and thank you for just being such a great advocate. I've enjoyed meeting you over the past year, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about a very important subject.
It definitely is, and I thank you for what you guys are doing and for your engagement, up in the Ohio Valley. So let's start there. Could you give us a brief overview of I.G.N.I.T.E and how you got involved in the fight against human trafficking?
Yeah, so it was just a little over a year ago. I was sitting at my kitchen table, and a friend of mine, Stacy Gilson, called me, and she had just the night before gone and seen the movie Sound of Freedom. And she, if you know Stacy Gilson, she's very passionate and very driven. And she called and she said, April, do you think this is really happening here? Have you seen this movie? And I said, yeah, I'm sure it's happening here. And she said she was sitting on her porch the night before with another friend, and that friend posed the question, said, well, what are you going to do about it? And she said, so April, we have to do something about it. And I had no idea what that would be, but I said, sure, let's do something. And so it just started with making phone calls and having no idea what the need was or who to contact or where this would go. And we have learned so much, things that we love to learn and things we wish we never heard over the last year. It's a hard subject for anybody. And until a year ago, I was probably guilty of just easily ignoring it. But
a lot of the people that unfortunately get trafficked and end up as victims of this situation, oftentimes they're people who, are runaways, or it could be people that are being trafficked across the border. And so oftentimes it does go unnoticed by, your everyday average family. one of the things that I'm really curious about, because living here in West Virginia is pretty rural, but you have some, city areas, you have some metropolis area, and we have major highways that cut through. In fact, your area up there of Wheeling, you've got a major highway that goes through there. How does your organization work within West Virginia, and what has been some of the more recent successes in combating human trafficking here?
Yeah. So over the last year, there's several things that we've done. We went to Charleston in January and helped lobby and try to get some bills passed to make it safer and to make it easier for our law enforcement to do the job that they need to do. We've met a lot of people in politics and learned a lot about bills and how they're written. And we work with the local organizations that we have met and worked with have been the Sexual Assault Help Center in Wheeling, West Virginia, the YWCA. We're fortunate enough that our local YWCA has a human trafficking division. They have a place where they can house victims and they can serve them in the way that they need to be served. And also Harmony House, which is an amazing organization.
Another great organization.
It is. And when we first met them, I honestly had no idea what they did. I thought it was a house. And we went down and met them, and they do forensic interviews with young kids so that they don't have to relive the horror that they've gone through. So we work with them, and honestly, it changes what we do because we really just show up and try to do whatever they need.
Can you explain that term? What is a forensic interview?
So a forensic interview is for someone who's gone through sexual assault. They may have to retell their story 10, 12, 15 times. They'll go to the hospital and have to tell their story. They'll meet a police officer. They'll meet with the nurse. They'll meet with the doctor. And they have to relive that and retell that. It's traumatic. For days, everybody that you meet, if you do get to the place where you can stand up and you can report it, it's a traumatic experience. For young children, the state of West Virginia, our area is fortunate enough that we have Harmony House close by. They have trained people to do an interview, to ask non-leading questions, to get the information that is needed. It's recorded, completely documented in one interview. And then that interview is shared with the police officer, with the caseworker, so that the child doesn't have to relive it.
That's good.
Yeah.
Can you explain some of the signs of human trafficking that people in our communities should be aware of?
Yeah, there's a great website. I always encourage people go to the resources that are out there, and it's humantraffickinghotline.com. There's a list of them, but some of the common ones are, it's common for kids now to couch surf. And we just think, they're just having a hard time at home living on friend's couch. Oftentimes that comes at a price. If you notice that your kid is or somebody that is all of a sudden being showered with gifts by someone that's not their parent. If they're living with someone that's not their parent. If you notice a change in their mood and their behavior and there's no explanation. Things like that can be signs that it is, but it's because there's different types of human trafficking. There's a long list. I encourage you to go to the humantraffickinghotline.org, check that out, and make sure that, that we're all educated and we understand what all of those signs are.
I'm putting it up in the chat for anybody that's watching.
Thank you.
And it's definitely something that I would recommend people go and check out.
Yeah.
So what are the unique challenges that West Virginia faces when it comes to human trafficking? I know that it's different, all across the country, the kinds of things that are issues. I'm obviously down at the border. It's going to be a little different than it is here. But in the experience that you've had so far in working with Ignite Hope, what are the unique challenges that you guys are seeing? What specifically seem to be the big problems here in West Virginia when it comes to human trafficking?
Well, one of the things you mentioned earlier, Nate, that there's a lot of rural area and there's a lot of poverty in West Virginia. And so if you can get a young person in a position where they need something from you, then it's easy for you to coerce them to do what you want them to do, right? So that's the hardest probably to overcome, because how do we do away with poverty? How do we do away with people being isolated and in these rural areas where it's a little easier to hide? And again, you mentioned earlier, we have 70 that runs right through the state. West Virginia does not have an anti-smuggling law, where Ohio and Pennsylvania does.
Wow.
So if you...
That's something that the state legislature could potentially, fix in order to help with this, right?
Yeah, it's one of the bills we went down to try and pass. Unfortunately, it didn't pass this year. So we'll be back next year. We'll be back at the Capitol pushing to have that passed, because it makes it the perfect place, right? If you're picking people up at the border and you're bringing them in, where better to go than somewhere that doesn't have an anti-smuggling law?
Well, definitely when you guys get ready to do that, please get in touch with me. I've made, a lot of really good contacts down there, and I would love to help you guys with that effort.
Absolutely. We'll do that.
So
those are the things. I mean, it makes it challenging. The interstate's right there. There's no anti-smuggling. There's poverty, isolation.
Yeah. You guys work with law enforcement sometimes. How do you collaborate with them and other agencies to rescue victims and bring traffickers to justice? So you mentioned the Harmony House, and that's a great organization and what they're doing. But what other organizations, or like I said, law enforcement agencies do you guys work with?
Yeah, we had a great privilege of meeting with the Department of Homeland Security, the West Virginia division. We sat down and met with their key players for human trafficking, and they're an amazing group of people. One of the things that we do is we collaborate our educational material to make sure that it's all in line, so that what they're learning in Southern West Virginia, what they're learning in Wheeling, what they're learning all across the board, it's covered completely. These people have done it right. I mean, the curriculum that they put out, the training that they put out, they've done it right. They haven't missed anything. And so we use their curriculum when we do training. Places that they are not able to get into for training, we have opened those doors, because we can access local schools, we can access church organizations and go in and say, hey, can you bring this in? And that allows some of those law enforcement officers to go in and do the training that the community needs.
That brings up, that kind of brings up another question then. When you say training, who are your audiences? Obviously, you mentioned one of them is youth and at the school. So, but where do you guys do your training at? How do you do your training? What's some of the material that's covered in there?
Well, everybody is our target. If you're a grandparent, if you have people in your life, then you need this training. So everybody. Some of the material, of course, it depends on the age. Harmony House does a great job with school-aged, and they have Aaron's Law now, which is great, that requires West Virginia and Ohio. It requires a 1-hour training for sexual assault in schools. So that's been a great way for them to get in. Unfortunately, it doesn't include a lot of the private schools. We just knock on doors and ask, because Harmony House isn't able to do that, but we are. And so we knock on the door and say, hey, we have this great training. Your kids, we think it's important that your teachers are educated. And we do that for schools, for churches, for businesses. We've done self-defense classes with insurance office and their employees.
That's great. Now, in terms of what you guys are doing primarily as an organization, a lot of what you guys, I know, do is education. What would you say is that the majority of what you guys are focused on right now is education?
It's probably 50% of it It's probably
Okay.
50% of what we do. And it's the thing that probably we have gotten the best at because we have kind of found that avenue to do it.
Hmm.
But we also focus on, there are some great organizations in the area. I mentioned the Sexual Assault Help Center, the Y, and Harmony House. A lot of what they do, or all of what they do, is grant funded. Those grants come to them and they're earmarked for very specific
Mm.
things. They don't include things like hospital bills or tires for their car so that they can get to work, or a new outfit for the job interview. So we are in the process right now, and we will announce this at our annual charity event in January, but we are in the process right now of creating a fund that would just be for those organizations, and they would be able to reach out to us so that we could pay for the things that grants can't pay for.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, folks, for all of you that are listening that live in West Virginia, or even if you're in Ohio or Pennsylvania, I highly, highly, highly recommend going to the Ignite Hope fundraising event. It is amazing. I was so impressed. You can tell that Stacy's got a gift for putting on events, because man, what an amazing event that was.
Thank you.
And it really, I've been to, as a former candidate, I've been to a lot of fundraising events. I've been to a lot of events. That one was phenomenal. It was really the highlight of my year, and in the presentation that was done with the dance studio, it was very moving, and then the food was phenomenal. So and all for a great cause.
Thank you. Yeah.
So definitely, when you guys get ready for that, please do get in touch with me and come back on the show, and we'll put that out there for folks.
January 18th. Mark your calendars. January 18th is
And
when that event's going to be.
Can they buy tickets on the website for that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
You can go to ignitehopeohiovalley.com.
Great.
Yeah.
That's great.
And you'll be able
So I want to shift our conversation a little bit towards the U.S. State Department's 2024 Trafficking in Persons report. They put one of these out every year. It provides a comprehensive look at global and national efforts to combat human trafficking. It categorizes countries into tiers based on their efforts to meet minimum standards for eliminating trafficking. The report notes that while there have been improvements in the anti-trafficking laws and victim support, significant challenges remain, including the need for better victim identification, which is what we were just talking about. Also with support systems and prosecutions for traffickers. There's not enough of those things happening. And that is, I think, a big part of it, part of the problem. The report also emphasizes that traffickers are often target vulnerable populations, that they often target vulnerable populations such as migrant workers, illegal aliens coming across the border. We've seen a ton of that kind of stuff happening, of course, in the last 4 years with the laxed immigration laws, and just it's not that the laws have been relaxed. It's that the enforcement measurements are not being done at all. Also, runaway youth, are particularly vulnerable, and those facing economic hardship, like you mentioned, which we have a lot of here in West Virginia. In fact, I would imagine that that goes hand in hand with the drug problem that we have with fentanyl and heroin here in West Virginia. So the 2024 TIP report highlights some global improvements, but it also stresses those ongoing challenges. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, how does this compare to what you're seeing in West Virginia?
I'm not familiar with all of the statistics. I have read through them. West Virginia, on the grading scale, right now, and I believe, and I would have to look it up to be sure, each state is graded. Right now, West Virginia in 5 or 7 categories, I can't remember which, either receives a D or an F in all of those categories.
Wow.
And, if you think about that, if your kid brought home a D on their report card, like, would you be satisfied with that? Or would you push hard? Would you study with them? Would you make them accountable? Would they lose privileges? There would be some things in place to bring that from a D to, and the DF grading has been several years consistent. And so
Are there specific areas where our state is falling short? Or you mentioned that we got some of these groups, but like specifically, where are we here as a state failing in obviously you mentioned one of the things, which was the anti-smuggling law.
yeah.
But what other kinds of things? Give me some examples of where we need to improve as a state to where our audience can contact their state legislature and start hounding them to fix them.
So as far as convictions, of course, that's really low. I think we just need to make it a little easier for our law enforcement officers. There needs to be some laws into place that allow them to go in and do the job they need to do when there's suspicion. One of the things West Virginia came out with that was good is there's an app that you can download on your phone, and it's called SeeSend, SEESEND. If you do suspect someone is being trafficked in any way, you can send that tip. It does go right to Homeland Security, the West Virginia Division in Charleston. They follow up on every single tip.
That's really
the
good.
problem is, it is great. It is great. And West Virginia is one of the only ones that has that. So in my book, that's a great effort. The problem is that when it gets back to the local level, it's hard to prove. There's not manpower for it. There's not money for it. These things take a long time to investigate. It's not something you just go in and, see how many girls are in their basement. That's not how this is happening. And so I think there's just not the money. There's not the emphasis for our law enforcement to do the things that they need to do. So that would be a huge help. It's just so they're able to follow up on these tips that Homeland Security are getting and passing on to the local enforcement. One of the other things that they grade poorly on is the consequence. If you are convicted, the consequence. Imagine you're a 12-year-old and you're being trafficked. The consequence for that should be way worse than felony larceny, and it's not.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, that's something that I called for during my candidacy. I believe that especially in cases where there's commercial sex trafficking going on, human trafficking going on, and it's basically slavery. I think that should come with the death penalty. To me, it's an egregious abuse of human rights, and it's crimes against humanity. And in many other places around the world don't tolerate that at all. And yet we got guys that go to jail and they get out in a very short time. Because like you said, they don't have the right laws on the books to go after these people. And the feds, especially in the case of where they're trafficking across multiple state lines, it used to be that kidnapping was a capital crime. You got the death penalty for kidnapping, but they haven't done that in a very long time. And I think, especially when there's children involved, absolutely, they need to bring that back, and they should be charging these people with kidnapping and going for the maximum penalty, which is the death penalty. That to me would put a stop to this, or at least would put a big dent in it.
I think you're right. I think it would put a big dent. And, that child, we were talking about, imagine a 12-year-old child that's going through it. That child will never walk away from this. They'll never shake it. It will follow them until the day they die, and their family. It will affect the way they raise their children. It will affect their marriage. It will affect their parents. And their abusers are allowed to walk away.
Yeah.
They're allowed to just get this short time, and then it's over. It's done. It shouldn't be.
Yeah. Now, what are the trends that you're seeing locally, up there in Wheeling in that area? Are most of these people who are being trafficked, are they majority young people? Are they all ages? What are the trends that you're seeing?
Um, it is all ages. Wheeling has a huge homeless population.
Hmm.
Um, that's a big part of it. Um, they also have a big drug issue. And so, what we see most here is not snatch and grab and put on the internet and sell. It's a lot of local, you know, taking a kid in that's having a hard time in their home and getting them hooked on drugs. And pretty soon that kid relies on you for their fix, and then you start sending them out. Um,
Wow.
we see that a lot as far as kids go. In our homeless population in Wheeling, they, over the last year, moved the homeless from around the city into a specific camp. So they dedicated this plot of land that would be for the homeless. They could set up tents, which on one hand sounds like a fix to a problem. On the other hand, these women that are being abused and trafficked, or young people, young men that are being abused and trafficked, now are required to live in the same camp as their abuser. There's no escape. And there's
Wow.
nowhere else in the city they're allowed to go except for a shelter, which is full. They can go to the Y, which is full. And if they don't get into those places, they have to go to the homeless camps and live next to their abuser.
Wow. Well, folks, we got to take a commercial break and give a word to our sponsors. But when we get back, we're going to dig into a recent cross-country sex traffickers story where they were just indicted and charged and sentenced for 14 and 30 years in prison. And I want to talk a little bit about that when I get back. But stay tuned because we got a lot more to talk about.
Born in the coastal plains of South Texas, Smoking Gun Coffee is founded by combat veterans that know exactly what a cup of coffee needs to taste like. Run by father and son, each coffee bean is perfected, roasted at 500 degrees, and cooled with a Gulf Coast breeze. Smoking Gun Coffee hand makes and bags each ounce of coffee for maximum customer satisfaction. With every purchase, 10% goes back to organizations that help veterans and local communities. That's Texas made, one bag at a time. To find out more, go to www.smokingguncoffee.com.
Welcome back to the Raising Cain Show. This is Nate Cain, and I'm here with my guest, April Brock from Ignite Hope. And we've been talking about the organization that she serves with, which has been fighting this issue of human trafficking, and they're doing an amazing job. In fact, I got to know a lot of you guys over the last year. One of the things that before we went to break that I mentioned was that there was a story that recently broke, that a recent sentencing of cross-country sex traffickers to 14 and 30 years in prison, which is a significant legal victory. What are your thoughts on this case? And do you think that this kind of sentencing sends a strong enough message to traffickers?
Well, absolutely, without a doubt, no. I don't think the sentencing sends a strong enough message. 14 years of your life, and you took someone else's complete life in one of the most heinous, atrocious ways. So much that most people don't even get involved because they can't face it, they can't deal with it. It's just a hard subject to even talk about, let alone people living it and going through it. So 14 years, absolutely not. I think, and because I agree with you, because this involved a child. This was a kid. 30 years is not even near enough. I agree that the death penalty would be more appropriate.
And this person, these people, they operated across multiple states, which falls under federal prosecution guidelines. You're talking about minors. You're talking about kidnapping.
Yeah.
I really think that is part of the problem is that there are not hard enough penalties. I feel the same way, by the way, with people who are involved in the commercial sale of fentanyl. Fentanyl being something that has just taken the lives of so many people. To me, there are certain crimes that are crimes against humanity, and those are ones that should be dealt with, to the stiffest penalties possible. The What do you know about when you are with the work that you guys have done in talking with law enforcement in particular? How widespread are these trafficking networks like that in places like West Virginia, or do they stick to the I-70 corridor? I mean, what information can you share with us that you've learned about these types of networks?
But some of the most surprising facts for me is, and I never would have thought this. There's a local group that's specific of law enforcement officers that specifically deal with human trafficking in the area, and one of the major exchange sites for West Virginia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania is right here in the valley. It's 20 minutes from my house. And it's a very public place, but it's also close to borders, and it's right close to the interstate. And there's a no smuggling law in West Virginia, so you can exchange, and right here, 20 minutes. And so in this area, of course, I think whatever numbers they're way beyond that, because it's such a hard crime to convict, to kind of pin down, if you will. Because people that are victims don't want to give up their handler. That's their lifeline. That's their fix. That's their bread and butter. Like, I would die without them, even though they're doing these awful things. The other thing in this area is that it is generational. If it's not being exchanged on the highway and, being put from one car to another, there's a lot of generational human trafficking in this area, that grandma is the handler. And so to turn her in would be to turn the whole family in, and to admit the horrible things that you've done your entire life.
Wow.
Several years ago, I, through my church, mentored a group of women, and one of the women that I mentored was 13 when her dad started trafficking her. Oh. And his wife had left him because he had put her in that position for years, and she left her children there. She, in the middle of the night, just took off. And so then the 13-year-old girl became his payment for his fix. So dad wanted drugs, so he prostituted out his daughter in exchange for drugs. She would work with that. She didn't want to tell people how dirty she was. She took on so much guilt and so much shame. And then how do you prove it?
Right.
The proof, that he received drugs in exchange for that, and it wasn't her being willing. The proof that when she was 13, 15 years ago, this was happening to her. It's hard to prove, so how do you step out?
Yeah. Wow. That's just horrifying.
Yeah.
On these cases where you've got multi-state operations going on, or they're these are complex cases, are you guys working at all, or do you work with the feds at all, or are there multi-state law enforcement organizations or task forces that you guys are working with on those types of things? Because I imagine that if a lot of the exchanging is going on in West Virginia because of the lack of a smuggling law, that could be something where folks might be able to get involved with to help keep an eye on places like that, to report when there's something suspicious going on.
Yeah. So we don't have a huge part in that. We speak with law enforcement, to find out where the education is needed, where people, can be watching. We don't have a huge hand in that. The one thing that we do at every training that we go to, we talk about the signs that you can watch for, depending on the age of the kid. That's different for a 5-year-old than it is for a 25-year-old. We talk about how to approach that, because the things that you say, you know, what I would normally say without being trained may just get the whole thing thrown out of court because it's forcing them into saying something. And so just how to be careful, how to approach it, and how to report it. So calling your local law enforcement, downloading the app. My hope is that every training we've done before we leave, they've downloaded the CSend app. And that's anonymous. Just send in that tip and let them follow up. And just for the law enforcement officers, getting them connected with these organizations so that they can get the most up-to-date education and training. We've done that.
So the case that I was talking about earlier, it involved coercion, threats, and violence to control victims. Can you speak to the challenges of helping survivors recover from that kind of trauma?
Yeah. And I'll try not to get emotional because it's the hardest part, right? You know, they get the courage to step up, and the things that they have to go through. In West Virginia, you're not required to have a forensic nurse on staff. It's recommended, it's great if you do, but you're not required to. So one of the stories that I heard that broke my heart, there was a young woman who was able to escape. She came to the local sexual assault help center. They took her for a forensic exam. So a forensic exam is a nurse that is trained to collect the right things, the right evidence, and then present that to the court. There is no rape kit if there's not a forensic nurse. They can't do a rape exam. They can't do. And so that night, she went to the local hospital who checked her in. She sat in the waiting room with the advocate that was with her. They got back in her room and apologized. They didn't have a forensic nurse on staff. Maybe you could go to this hospital. So she went to the hospital 40 minutes away, went in, they checked her in. She sat in the waiting room, went to the back. They said, we apologize. We don't have a forensic nurse on staff. There's nobody here. She had to travel across to Ohio because Ohio requires a forensic nurse to be on call. So she traveled over to Ohio, who did the exam. The tragedy, not only did she have to relive that 3 times that night, she received a bill from all 3 hospitals.
Oh my gosh.
Every month she pays. And I imagine has to relive. And her start is set back because she didn't walk away with a wad of cash in her pocket. She walked away with nothing. And because we didn't have the resources in place to help, she was sent not to 1 place, not to 2 places, but 3 places, and then was billed for services we couldn't even give her.
See, that right there is like the perfect thing to me that seems like it's something that would be so easy to fix. If the state legislature were to require that every county have a forensic nurse that is on call, or that at least every hospital has to have, 1 or 2 people that are trained, in to do that kind of work, because it's absolutely critical. And I imagine it's time sensitive as well.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's so sad. Unbelievable.
One of the things that story, that victim's story, is one of the things that brought about the I.G.N.I.T.E Hope Fund that we're working on building now. Because a grant won't allow the Sexual Assault Help Center to pay for her medical bills. There's not a grant for that. And so that would be one of the situations that that organization could reach out to I.G.N.I.T.E Hope and say, hey, I have this girl. She's got this bill that needs paid, just so she don't get another one in the mail. And then we would step up. Not just our organization, but the community behind our organization that will create that fund will step up and take care of that bill for that woman so that she doesn't have to worry about that.
Do you guys have this? Is there a place where people can donate towards that fund already in place?
There is not now, but there will be.
Okay.
We are announcing that at our event, January 18th. And so once we roll that out, just because there's a lot of legalities to put into place.
Sure.
And so we're working on that now. We anticipate that that will all be wrapped up by the end of the year. January 18th, we will announce that, and people will be able to give to that fund.
Good. I think that's a very worthy cause, without a doubt. There's no reason, for somebody that has gone through a trauma like that and has had just all of, I can imagine the emotions that they would have to just go through that, but then to have to be turned down and have to go sit in another place and go to another place,
Right.
only to have nothing good come out of it, and then you end up getting hit with the bills. I mean, that seems like that should be a crime in and of itself.
Yes.
It's just unbelievable.
And how many people would quit before the third exam?
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. I mean, to me, it kind of, I don't see how, that to me seems very, very much unconstitutional, I guess you could say. I mean, I look at it like this, right? If you're a cop and somebody gets murdered and they need to do a forensic report, right? The ME comes in, medical examiner, and he does his, an autopsy and all of that. They don't send the bill to the family for that, right?
Right.
If your car gets stolen and the cops come and they go and expend taxpayer money to go and send detectives out to find out who stole your car, you don't get a bill at the end of the day for that.
No.
How in the world
Mm-hmm.
can a woman who's been raped or a woman who's been trafficked be expected to pay for the investigation?
It doesn't make any sense, does it?
It's
It's unfathomable.
it is. It's evil.
Imagine.
It is absolutely wrong on so many levels.
Uh-huh.
I'm really shocked. I wrote that down. That is something we definitely got to get our state legislature to fix, because there's no reason that should ever happen in our state, or any state for that matter. When you guys are dealing with these kinds of situations, or you're talking to victims, I imagine there's immediate needs like what you just mentioned, but there's also long-term healing, and a lot of times that takes therapy, and therapy is not cheap, especially if you get a good therapist. I know firsthand, as a former whistleblower who was outed and had death threats and got poisoned and had FBI raid my house and all kinds of problems that occurred. But one of the things were my kids were traumatized.
Yeah.
They had PTSD. They still do. And, and so I looked for a therapist here that would be covered by insurance. I couldn't find a single decent therapist in the area that had an availability, because we're so lacking in therapists. But I ended up finding a good one, but I'm paying out of pocket for it.
Yeah.
And it's quite expensive. But I can imagine that that's another issue that is probably not being paid for, is that a lot of these people probably need some therapy to get through what happened to them and what they went through. And that's something that is, like I said, I imagine that I know that's a problem here in West Virginia. We don't have enough therapists, and so they may be forced to go outside of state to find somebody. Thank God nowadays a lot of that can be done over the phone and can be done remotely, but you still got to be able to find a way to pay for it. Is that something that you guys are considering raising funds towards as well?
I'll tell you, one of the things we are very blessed with, we talked about Harmony House, our local Harmony House. It is one of the only Harmony House organizations in the United States that serves multiple states. So they are Ohio and West Virginia, just because it's so close on the border. And Harmony House, if your child is sent through Harmony House during the investigation, Harmony House offers therapy.
Oh, thank
Our
God.
local Harmony House, post-COVID, their grants got cut by about 50%. So every single person, there are 10 employees at the local Harmony House. Every single one of them, their paycheck is paid through a grant, which post-COVID got cut 50%. And those people stayed. They didn't care that their paychecks were cut in half.
Wow.
There are only 2 Harmony House organizations that offer therapy, not just for the victim, but for their entire family for free. And ours is one of them.
Wow.
So
That's
if
something
the route that you go, you get that benefit. Otherwise, you're right. You're right. It's a struggle.
That's something that that people don't often think about is, we often think about the victim, but we don't often think about the families
Yeah.
whose child was trafficked, or even if it's a situation where, um, I remember hearing one story of a child who they were, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 years old, male child, and his sister was being, basically prostituted out, by the father. And she was basically telling, her brother, that so and so is bugging me, or, but he didn't know what that meant. And the guilt that he carried with him after he found out later in life what had happened, he carried with him for a long time. And so there's all kinds of scenarios. You got, of course, parents who probably, maybe they lost their child to traffickers or something like that. And, and or you have a lot of situations where parents get incarcerated and kids end up in the system.
Yeah.
And those parents, while they're in this, while the parent is incarcerated, the kid ends up getting trafficked. All kinds of scenarios that I imagine you would need to have some family counseling and therapy to deal with those types of things. Can you share any, other personal stories of your experiences with Ignite Hope that, have been meaningful to you, or that where you saw um, something happen that had a positive change in somebody's life?
Mm. Um, so yeah, one of the things, and this is, I'm trying to think of, I don't want to give too much of someone's personal story away, but
Sure.
there was a young girl that I knew for years. And I knew that her situation was hard, and I knew that home wasn't good when she was growing up. And she was able to come to an event that we had, and just her hearing the stories in the room, and her hearing other people talk about, the organizations that help and what's in place, and here's what it looked like, allowed her to say, hey, that's what happened to me. It allowed her to step up. And thank goodness she is in a good place now. She's grown up and she's out of that. But I don't know that she would have been healed from that. I've watched her over the last year go through this amazing healing process just because she was in the room when someone was saying, this happened to me too. And
Yes.
it felt like it's
Yeah.
not me that's a bad person.
Yeah.
It happened to other people. It was relatable. And so over the past year, just watching her step into, going to therapy and admitting what has happened to her, admitting what she needed to overcome, and just getting to a place where she's starting to heal.
Yeah. I've heard that about about group therapy. That one of the important things about it, one of the things that it's really helpful for, is knowing that you're not alone,
Sure.
knowing that you're not, the only person that's gone through that, and that in and of itself, is a very helpful thing in dealing
Yeah.
with that kind of trauma. That's why it's so effective with, alcoholism, right? Is that, it's the fact that, you're not the only person that's struggling with that. And so I think that those types of things are very important, very good. Um,
Yeah. It,
this is
we just need to
this is
start talking.
probably,
It's
yeah,
such a
you're
hard
absolutely,
subject, and we don't want to talk about it. But you don't know who's
yeah,
in the
no, you're
room.
right.
It just needs you to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, I think probably everybody has had some experience or has known somebody, who's had some sort of, sexual trauma. And it is a very difficult topic, to broach and talk about, because there's so much, just, I think, personal pain that a lot of people feel about experiences and traumas in their own lives. But also too, I think there's an issue where it's like a taboo subject, to talk about as the American people. We don't want to get into that, but the reality is that this stuff is going on all around the country. And like you said, it's not just traffickers that are trafficking across states, like in this story, but it's also parents that are,
Yeah.
hooked on drugs, trafficking their own children for it, or, in some cases, grandparents. I mean, I've heard, and what you mentioned about generational, that's something that I had never even thought about, because I just can't fathom that. I was fortunate enough to grow up with parents that protected me and loved me, and and would never do something like that. They were not hooked on drugs. They weren't, in that situation. But there are a lot of people. I think right now, the last I checked, there was over 7,000 children in the system in West Virginia, mostly because of parents who are incarcerated over drug use.
Yeah.
And it's such a travesty, in our
It's
country,
a
but
big number.
especially here in West Virginia. And I really think that, all of these, when you have that cycle, in a family that continues, and it's a very difficult thing to break,
Yeah.
without a doubt. So, I realize this has been a very tough subject to talk about, and I really appreciate you coming on, tonight. As we get ready to close tonight's show, I want to thank you and thank Ignite Hope for shedding light on this deeply disturbing issue, and for the crucial work that you guys are doing to end human trafficking in West Virginia. We've got to do everything that we can. It sounds to me like there's still a lot that needs to happen, within our state legislature, and probably within, the finding the funds, to help with some of these, issues with, the care for, victims of this crime. Thank God we have, great groups, that are out there doing a lot of this good work. But as you mentioned, Harmony House had their, budget cut in half. So we've got to find, ways to be able to, replace those funds, because I guarantee you that there's probably a lot more people dealing with these issues, and that that they don't have, the resources to even, be able to do what needs to be done. There's probably a lot more that could be done.
Yeah.
And but it's what they're doing, and what you guys are doing is crucial. So before we go, can you tell listeners one more time where they can learn more about Ignite Hope and how they can support your efforts?
Okay. Yeah. So you can find us on Facebook. We're just Ignite Hope. Or you can go to our website, ignitehopeohiovalley.com. Um, if you want to get involved, there's a link there. You can click on it to get involved. Actually, I am the one that takes care of all of our volunteers, so you'll get a phone call from me if you sign up for that. We would love to have anybody as part of our team. I always think, the victims of this crime suffer more than most other crimes. I mean, it's just horrendous suffering. And so if you're not a victim, you should for sure be an advocate, one side or the other. And thank God I was not a victim. And so that's why I'm able to step up and be an advocate and do the things that need done for the people that are hurt the most in our community.
Definitely. The last thing I want to mention, I always give my guests the last and final word. So if there was one thing that people take away from our conversation tonight that you had the ability to make sure that they didn't forget, what would that be? What would be the one thing you want people to take away from this conversation?
That you have to start talking about it. You have to start talking about it to your lawmakers, your legislators, your state officials. You have to start talking about it to your neighbors. You have to start talking about it with your children. Go to the website that we mentioned. Look that up. Find out what it is. Just educate yourself and talk about it, talk about it, talk about it.
And can you give that website one more time?
Yeah, it's humantraffickinghotline.org.
Okay, that's great. I always like to end my show in prayer, and my reason for that is that these issues that we're dealing with in life, whether they're political or whether they're, these real human issues, there's a part of this that we have the responsibility to do our part. But we're fools if we think that we can do this without God's help. I imagine that your faith probably plays a huge role in your ability to just be able to keep yourself composed when dealing with this kind of stuff, because I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and goes, oh, hey, I want to go deal with this problem. It's kind of counter to our human nature. So we need God's help in order to be able to do good work and in order to be able to convince the right people within the state legislature to make the necessary changes to law in order to find those resources to help these people. And ultimately to get for our law enforcement to be able to find these criminals and put them away, and prosecutors, to bring the right cases. So I just recognize that we need God's help in this. And so I'm going to end up closing this in prayer, and then we'll end the show. But thank you so much, April, for coming on here and for talking about this.
Appreciate you.
Heavenly Father, we come before you tonight with heavy hearts, knowing the darkness and evil that exists in the world through the scourge of human trafficking. We pray for the victims, Lord, that you would bring them comfort, healing, and freedom from their captors. We ask for your hand of protection over those who are vulnerable and at risk. Lord, we also pray for your divine intervention to expose those who are perpetrating these horrific crimes. Shine your light into the darkness, into the darkest corners, and bring these traffickers to justice. Give wisdom and strength to our law enforcement, our advocates, and all those who are working to end this evil. May they be relentless in their pursuit of justice, and may the traffickers face the full weight of accountability for their actions. Guide us all, Lord, as we seek to be a voice for the voiceless and to stand up against this injustice. Help us to act with courage and compassion as we work to bring an end to this tragedy. In the holy name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Raise some Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless, day and night. We'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some cane, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change. Time is now. We gotta raise some cane.